This is the new Xbloom Studio. It has more features, a new display, physical controls, and it costs less than the original. But what did they sacrifice to accomplish that, and is it worth your consideration? Let's find out. Before we get going, I will mention that this unit was sent to me by Xbloom for an early look, and for the sake of this review, as always, that will have zero impact on the contents of this video or the opinions. If you do want to check out the Xbloom Studio, I will have it linked down in the description below, along with a code for an exclusive early bird offer. Starting off, it's an important clarification to make that this is not a new separate model in the Xbloom lineup. The Studio is intended to replace the original Xbloom, which only started delivering to customers 3 or 4 months ago. With that in mind, the new Xbloom Studio obviously maintains much of the same design language, except this time in a matte plastic finish versus the metal finishes found on the original. While the new plastic shell is clearly one of the areas they've used to reduce the overall cost on the Studio, in terms of appearance, I think I actually prefer the look of the matte finish, at least on the black version that I received. So although there is technically a sacrifice in build quality here, in this exact instance, I'm not particularly upset about it. A few other subtle changes that I noticed were that the bean chute now has a sliding door, the X-Pod holder is now lower profile, still metal, but lower profile, and the door on the water tank is now a satisfying hinge. What unfortunately hasn't changed is the still very small water reservoir that needs constant refilling. You will have the option to plumb in this machine to a jug of any size, which is pretty convenient, but the built-in reservoir is still a shortcoming. One of the not so subtle changes is now the inclusion of physical control dials on the front of the machine, which we'll chat about the functions of a little bit later. However, in terms of build quality, these pleasantly surprised me with their knurled metal finish, kind of reminiscent of something you'd see from a brand like Buster and Punch. I'm glad that Xbloom took notes and still spent the money on high touchpoint areas like this. Another one of the bigger visual changes on the machine is now the inclusion of a drip tray. In contrast to the new dials, the plastic this is made of is very cheap and glossy, and I would have definitely preferred a nice metal grate at the very least. However, if a plastic drip tray is the cost of all the added functionalities in the Studio, then I guess I am reluctantly on board. Hiding underneath that drip tray is the first big addition to the Xbloom Studio, a built-in scale. This scale can be used independently to weigh beans or just for other uses around the kitchen with a capacity of 2 kilograms, although the workspace is a little bit cramped due to these overhead sections. The scale also contributes data to live graph readouts we now see as part of the app. Propping up your phone on top of the machine is a great party piece showing the progress of the brew, each pouring step, flow into the coffee bed, as well as flow into the cup. The scale functionality is controlled using the furthest right of the 3 new knobs. Similarly, the other 2 knobs are programmed independently to use both the grinder and hot water dispensing. This ability to kind of piece out the functions of the machine and do so without the use of the app is probably the single biggest change overall to the Xbloom Studio. With the middle knob, you can control the temperature, pouring volume, and even pouring pattern to use the Xbloom kind of like a very accurate gooseneck kettle. With the left knob, you can then operate the grinder with control not only over grind size, but also grinder RPM, which is of course a very trendy thing to play around with, especially on conical grinders. This piecing out of functionalities was widely requested on the original, but I don't think that using each of these without any automation is going to be a very common way that people use this machine. Instead, the app now allows you to program in a workflow that works for you, using as many or as few functions of the machine as you like. You can still opt to use their X-Pods, which will program in all the correct parameters and do all the grinding and brewing for you, according to how the roasters recommend. But now, if you have your own grinder, you can simply turn off the grinding steps in the routine and use this just as an automated pour-over system. You don't even need to use the X-Pods or the Omni Dripper. You can simply place any brewer of your choice on the scale and have it pour a preset recipe. However, cup height will be a consideration if you're using any wider brewers like a V60. If you want to use your own beans, you can use the scale to weigh out your dose, and then once again use any combination of grinder, brewing device, and pouring technique that you like. They've even added a functionality in for a bypass step if you want to create a concentrate recipe and then dilute afterwards. Once the brewer stops dripping as detected by the scale, it will move out of the way, and then Xbloom will dilute by the requested amount. Any of these custom configurations can then be programmed onto a recipe card, so you don't always need to pull out your phone. You can simply tap your custom card, and then it will recall your desired settings. Personally, there are still 2 ways of using this machine that I would really like to see. Xbloom, feel free to steal these. Number 1, I think it would be super neat if you could just record your desired workflow and save that as a recipe going forward. You would put the machine in kind of a programming mode, then set the grinding parameters, and then do the pouring recipe manually using that new kettle functionality. This would be a much more intuitive method, in my opinion, versus the still slightly tedious method of manually entering in each step in the app. The second functionality I would like to see is the ability to save a default recipe onto the machine, so you don't even need to tap that custom card. If no RFID is detected, the machine will just recall that default recipe. In this way, you can use the machine completely analog by just dosing your beans and then tapping on the brewing cradle to start the recipe. Despite those 2 items on my wish list, I'm overall pretty happy with the improvements to workflow and recipe building made to the Xbloom Studio. I think they've done a pretty good job of appeasing the enthusiast market while not sacrificing ease of use for those who simply want the curated Xpods and associated recipes. Not to mention, this machine will still be getting over-the-air updates after release, so we can probably expect to see some added features down the line. Hopefully my ideas. The grinder on the Studio has also seen some improvements, which include new static-free materials in the grinding path in addition to the active anti-static, as well as a physical sweeper arm. The result is an even cleaner grinding experience compared to the original, which was already no slouch in this department. There's also a separate magnetic dosing cup if you do want to use the grinder for an external brewer or even espresso, which this grinder can grind fine enough for now. The new Omni Dripper 2 is also made from anti-static materials and is overall a much more polished item than we saw in the original Kickstarter. It has a removable base for cleaning and even a clever lip to keep filters properly seated at all times. Last but not least, and this took me an embarrassingly long time to notice, but Xbloom have moved away from the original electrostatic pouring system and have replaced it with a kinematic spout, which has all of the same pouring characteristics, but was apparently much simpler to calibrate, adjust, and mass produce in a cost-effective way. Alright, holy smokes was that a lot of changes for a machine which on the surface looked pretty darn similar to the original. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think. With all these new functionalities and a drop in price, is the Xbloom now something that you would consider? Personally, and completely transparently, I was much more excited to get this version of the Xbloom on my counter than the original. This is just because it allows me much more freedom to use it the way that I actually want it. From what I've heard, the curated and sometimes very limited Xpods have actually been selling really well, and I do think that's a great way to experience a variety of curated coffees without needing to worry about dialing in. But for me, I really only see myself using this with my own beans and my own recipes. And for that reason, the Studio was a pretty darn exciting update that was generating a lot of buzz at Expo in Chicago this year. So to sum it all up, I think that Xbloom as a company has done a good job of listening to early customer feedback and launching an updated machine very quickly. I'm currently using the Studio in my kitchen on busy mornings when I need a bit more automation, and unless I need to brew for a large group, I don't think it'll be leaving anytime soon. Again, if you want to check out that early bird offer, you can use my link and offer code down in the description. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and even consider subscribing if you want to see some more like it in the future. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.